Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're tuning in from. We're really excited to be gathering virtually today, and a very warm welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us. This is the 14th webinar in our local and subnational government information series, and this webinar is made possible with support from the Post-2020 Biodiversity Framework EU Support Project. So I just want to take this opportunity to welcome you all, and I'll introduce myself in a second. The title for today's webinar is The Outcomes of the Edinburgh Process, which we're very excited to be sharing with you, and really starting to explore the question of what's next for cities and regions on the roadmap to COP15. Today's webinar will feature an impressive panel of speakers, and I'll introduce them in a moment. The webinar is brought to you on behalf of the Global Task Force, for which ICLEI is the focal point to the 3 Rio conventions, including the CBD. And I just want to situate this webinar before we get going in the overall series. You can see, as it highlighted on your screen, this is the webinar for the 23rd of July, and our next webinar will take place on the 20th of August. So we encourage you to register and join us in the remaining webinars throughout the course of the year. I just want to quickly refer to our timeline. Many of you will be familiar with this, and I want to draw your attention to a few specific updates that I've highlighted in the green boxes. The first is that in September, we're expecting to have a special virtual session, a series of webinars as part of SAPSTA and SBI. And the second thing I want to draw your attention to is the newly announced dates for SAPSTA and SBI, SAPSTA being the 2nd to the 7th of November and SBI being the 9th to the 14th of November. And both those events are scheduled to take place in Quebec City in Canada. Finally, on the far right, I want to draw your attention to the CBD COP15 and the preliminary dates as per the most recent update from the CBD are the 17th to the 30th of May 2021. So finally, I'll draw your attention to the red star to situate us where we are now. We are finalizing the Edinburgh process, and hence the topic for this webinar, and we're really excited to share some of those outcomes with you. So my name is Timothy Blatch. I'm a professional officer at ICLEI Africa and the Global Coordinator of Cities with Nature, and I will be moderating the webinar. A few house rules before we get going, just to inform everyone that the webinar will be recorded and the recording will be made available to all attendees via a follow-up email that will be sent to you in due course. Please feel free to make use of the chat box throughout the webinar, where you can enter your questions or any comments or thoughts you may have. We will, once all the presentations are done, time permitting, have a quick question and discussion section. And at that moment, there are 2 ways you can ask a question, either by using the chat box or by raising your hand, and we will unmute you. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers or panelists for today. We have Mr. Terry Kasuna, who's the Chief Director of the Natural Environment Division at Aichi Prefecture, and it's wonderful to have him with us. We also have Mr. Robbie Beaver, who can't be with us in person, but has sent through a pre-recorded input that we will play. Robbie is with the Committee of the Regions, and we are thrilled to have his inputs today. I'd like to also introduce Ms. Wadzi, and Wadzi is the Chief Director for and Biodiversity Specialist and Monitoring and Services at the South African Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries. And we're thrilled to have Wadzi join us today. It's great to have you online. Ingrid is no stranger to the webinar series, and you'll all know her by now. She's the Senior Manager for Biodiversity and Nature-Based Solutions here at the ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Center. So thank you, Ingrid, as always, for your inputs. And last but not least, also no stranger to the series is Dr. Susan Campbell, who's an International Biodiversity Policy Manager with the Scottish Government. And she's going to be sharing more details on the Edinburgh process. So very briefly, I've covered the opening and welcome. I'm going to hand over in a second to Sue, who will reflect on the Edinburgh process and what's next for our constituency, before handing over to Ingrid, who will discuss the plan of action elements around the Edinburgh process and some of the inputs that were received throughout the consultation. Then I will hand over to Teru, who will speak to us and start to explore the idea of engaging national focal points as one of the things that have come out of the Edinburgh process. I will then play the pre-recording of Robbie Beaver on the EU biodiverse cities and regions in the next decade, touching on the linkages between the Edinburgh process and the new EU Biodiversity Strategy, before finally handing over to Wadzi, who will speak to us about the SA-EU dialogues as a model for vertical integration in support of the post-2020 framework. So without further ado, we've got a jam-packed schedule today. And as I've said, Sue, it's wonderful to have you with us again. And without further ado, I'll hand over to you. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Tim. And thanks very much to ICLEI for the invitation to speak at today's webinar. Good morning from a very dreary Edinburgh this morning. It's great to have the opportunity to describe the Ember process for engagement with subnational local governments and cities for the post-2020 framework, and to perhaps gain a new audience with more of a cities focus. I'm really thrilled to be here and to possibly extend in our subnational constituency for the Edinburgh process. Some of you might be familiar with the Edinburgh process. We've really built up a great partnership approach over the last few months, with Scottish Government leading the process of engaging the subnational and local constituency around the post-2020 framework. Can I have the next slide, please? We have developed great partnerships and really amazing working relationships throughout this process with not only the CBD, but with the subnational organisations that you can see here, including ICLEI and the Advisory Committee for Subnational Governments, and also the Goals Network. We are also working with the European Committee of the Regions and with our national and regional governments across the UK. And we also partner with a couple of our local delivery partners, including the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. And we have had valuable input from the UN Environment Programme's World Conservation Monitoring Centre as well. And between us all, we've co-developed this Edinburgh process of engagement heading towards COP15. On the next slide, I've outlined a timeline of the Edinburgh process. So this was we were supposed to be holding a 3-day workshop in Edinburgh in April this year to engage with the subnational community, but we've necessarily had to move everything online. And now we have a process that runs from April until COP15 and the parallel 7th Biodiversity Summit for cities and local authorities. And as Tim outlined in the timeline that he has shown, that we assume that those will be held in May next year. So you can see from the timeline that we've already undertaken some online events, and we've consulted on the zero draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We've consulted on the plan of action, which Ingrid will talk to you about, and we're also currently consulting on an Edinburgh Declaration, which is a high-level commitment statement for subnational and local authorities, which we hope will generate lots of signatories ahead of COP15. The declaration sets out our intent for a dedicated decision for the greater and stepped up inclusion of subnational authorities within the framework. Along the bottom there, you can see the two outputs, the declaration and a national focal point letter, which Terry will talk about. So I don't really want to say too much about those just now. So I'll move on to the next slide. Just to give a bit of feedback on what is coming out of the consultation, particularly on the zero draft document. I can't, in the time that I've got today, I can't pull out all of the things that are coming out, but these are the key things. Really quite positively, the majority of our respondents were satisfied with the goals, the mission, the targets and the level of ambition for subnational governments as set out in the zero draft framework. But when we looked at implementation aspects, a majority of respondents mentioned that they weren't engaged with their national focal point, either through the current post-2020 framework, nor had they been engaged through the development of a national biodiversity strategy and action plan, or through national reporting. And this is a really big result because it shows it's a huge area for improvement if the ambition of the post-2020 framework is to be realised. And it shows that at the national level of government, they're not utilising the wealth of expertise, the wealth of knowledge, the amount of data and resources, both financial and people resources, that exist at the subnational level. And it's a huge gap that needs to be addressed through much better vertical integration. So on the next slide shows some of the key conclusions from the Edinburgh process. And overall, our consultations show that whilst subnational and local governments and cities are not directly involved in national level planning and reporting of the CBD commitments, there's a huge willingness to become involved. Around 60% of our respondents said that they would like to become involved. And subnational and local governments are often uniquely placed to implement action at local level, for example, introducing nature-based solutions at local level. And this needs greater emphasis within the framework, we feel. National governments need to recognise and be willing to engage, and also to take action to engage much better with their subnational, local and city counterparts. And that applies right across the whole of the post-2020 framework. So moving forward, on the next slide, please, Tim. The Ember Process partners are looking to promote the outcomes of our subnational engagements, and we're looking to ask parties to the convention to act accordingly. So we'll be sending detailed reports of the Ember Process outcomes to upcoming CBD meetings, which Tim has already outlined in the timeline, in order to inform the greater inclusion and recognition of the subnational level right throughout the framework. We intend holding side events at these CBD meetings so that we can discuss more fully with parties how the subnational constituency can help them deliver the framework at national level, including advocating for a stepped-up plan of action for subnational and local authorities and cities to be adopted by the parties. But we also need your support across the subnational constituency in reaching and engaging with your national focal points. And the next slide shows how you can do this. We'd like you to become involved in the Edinburgh process if you're not already. We'd like you to flag the outcomes of the Edinburgh process to your national counterparts. And we invite you to do this by highlighting the Edinburgh process reports to your national focal points. The reports have been currently being drafted with an intent to publish those towards the end of August. And we'd also really like you to ask your national focal point to support stepped up inclusion of the subnational level involvement in delivering the framework. And this would be done through an updated subnational plan of action presented at SBI3 meeting in November. And we hope this would be adopted by the parties at COP15. And as I say, I think Ingrid's going to explain more about that. And those first two actions can be taken forward through the issue of a letter to your national focal point. And we've prepared a draft template of this letter for anyone that wishes to engage their national focal point. And I think Teru Kisuna from the Goals Network is going to describe that letter a bit later. And lastly, on the right there, we would like you to sign the Edinburgh Declaration, which will become available for online signature towards the end of August. And this would indicate your organisation's support of greater inclusion of subnational, local and city level governance within the next framework. And whether you represent a city or a region or a local authority, we would be very, very happy indeed to have your support. With that, I think I've run out of time, but I hope this sets the scene for the Edinburgh process and for the subsequent discussions that we'll be having in this webinar. And if you've not done so already and would like to engage with the Edinburgh process, you can get in touch with us in the Scottish Government Secretariat at the email address shown in this slide. Thanks very much, and apologies to Tim and the other speakers for running a bit over time.
Great, thank you so much, Sue. No worries on the timing. This is a very important input. We've been keeping the constituency up to date as the Edinburgh process has been unfolding. So thank you for your inputs today in giving us some guidance and direction and some things that we can do to support the process going forward. The idea is to establish a community of practice that is working together all the way to COP15. So I just want to reiterate what Sue has said, and for those who are not actively involved already, please do so. We really invite you to be part of this exciting process. And thanks, Sue, for outlining where we are going next. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Ingrid, who is going to talk to one of the specific components that we've been consulting on through the Edinburgh process. And Ingrid will outline some of the outcomes that have been received, or the inputs received throughout the consultation on the Plan of Action review document. Thanks for joining us, Ingrid, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim, and good day to everybody. And Tim, if you can take me to the next slide. So as part of this Edinburgh process, we also had a consultation on the existing plan of action that was adopted by the CBD parties in 2010 under Decision 1022. And the response was really good. We had in the order of 62 responses, and the breakdown of responses was really interesting because the participants of the Edinburgh process came from a very wide range of groups, and you can see in the diagram up front that the largest responses around specifically the consultation on the plan of action was from the subnational levels of government. The other thing that was very interesting, we also tested a respondents' level of understanding and knowledge and familiarity with the plan of action, and we found that it was really high, which is important also because it indicates that the substantive comments that people made and inputs that were made were coming from a place of experience and of good knowledge. So it validates the points that people were making. And if you go to the next slide, what this slide shows is that one of the two things that we were sort of testing through this consultation period was, firstly, to say, as we stand at the brink of a new framework for a global framework for biodiversity, what is it that the local and subnational government constituency wants? And we made several recommendations about the sorts of principles, for example, the inclusion of local and subnational governments where appropriate in the new framework and targets, the issue of resource mobilization needing to be increased for biodiversity action at subnational levels, the whole point about mainstreaming, capacity building, awareness raising, monitoring, evaluation and reporting, and then just the whole issue about supporting networks and the alliances and partnerships within this constituency to promote and contribute to the new implementation framework. And what was really interesting was that the comments and responses coming back from the respondents basically endorsed the principles. People felt that this was the sort of thing that they wanted. But for us, interestingly enough, was that there was a feeling that mainstreaming, for example, was more important than resource mobilization. In fact, there was a very strong call saying that mainstreaming is critical and it needs to have a multi-level governance approach. In other words, the vertical integration of mainstreaming is very important, not just sectoral mainstreaming. And also the feeling that things like monitoring and reporting were also more important. So in the diagram that you have in front of you, the red arrows show how respondents felt that those elements or those principles were more important, and the red arrows where they felt was less important. Now, obviously, I can't do justice to everything that was provided in terms of the consultation responses, but those are the sort of main key messages. So if you can take me to the next slide, what I want to show here is the second thing that we tested was to sort of look back and say, well, we've had a decade of the first plan of action. What did people feel worked well, and where were there areas for improvement? And the responses that came out here tallied up very well with the sort of responses that we were getting through the consultation on the GBF that Sue has just reported on. So while there was general recognition that there had been quite a lot done, a lot of the respondents felt that there was certainly area for a lot more progress and more improvement. And the areas that they felt needed improvement were specifically around the integration of NBSAPs. This is the point that Sue has made. Again, the point about improving greater integration and mainstreaming from the subnational levels as well, not just across sectors. The need for greater inclusivity at all levels. The question of strengthening resource access, as well as mobilization for local and subnational governments, and the need for more standardized and unified reporting systems so that the contributions that are made at the subnational levels can be aggregated up into national reporting. And I think, Tim, with that, I just want to go to my last slide. And just in conclusion, I think what was really important is that out of the responses that we got from this process, there's a very clear and strong mandate from the participants that certainly we need to have a dedicated and stepped up, more ambitious decision and plan of action going forward, and a stronger recognition by the CBD parties that local and subnational governments are constituent parts of government, obviously with their own mandates, and they're able to make and already are making very clear and good contributions at the landscape and local level. And then, as just to say one last thing, as Sue has indicated, that the outcomes on the dedicated decision and plan of action recommendation to the parties will be captured in the reports along with the inputs that we received. Thank you so much, Tim.
Great, thank you, Ingrid. Thanks for joining us and for sharing these important insights. You picked up on the need for stronger vertical integration, and I think that's perfectly aligned with the presentation that Wadzi will deliver in a few minutes' time. But before we get to that, I really want to welcome Mr. Teru Kasuna and thank him for joining us. Teru has also been an integral part of the Edinburgh Process, the goals group. And Teru is going to be discussing with us how to engage national focal points out of this process. So Teru, thanks for joining us, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Teru Kasuna from Aichi Prefecture in Japan. I am also working for GOALS, the group of leading subnational government toward Aichi biodiversity target, one of the Edinburgh Process partners. I'd like to bring an idea to strengthen the relationship with the CBD parties to follow the Edinburgh Process. Next slide, please. Okay, the 2050 vision, living in harmony with nature, is our common and ultimate goal for all on the earth. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to be adopted in COP15 should be the certain milestones and clarify our action target for them. The Edinburgh Process aims to maximize the contribution of local and subnational government, and for that, requests the dedicated decision on renewed and stepped up plan of action there. Next, please. Yes, it's too obvious that we need whole of government approach and vertical integration on biodiversity policies if we want to make them work effectively. For example, this slide is a map of rivers in the western part of Aichi Prefecture. I'm sorry, this is not clear enough, but red lines represent big rivers maintained by the national government, you see, but some upstream of these rivers shown by green lines are maintained by the prefectures. Also, blue lines show middle size of rivers, which the prefecture government controls. And even smaller numerous rivers not shown here are maintained by the municipalities. I am not familiar with the system of other countries, but I believe the vertical relationship among the different level of governments are quite complicated. Therefore, if we don't have vertically coherent policies, we could not carry out effective maintenance of ecosystem. So in Japan, there are 47 prefectures under the national government and around 1,700 municipalities under the prefectures. The national BSAP, Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan of Japan, set a goal that by 2020, all prefectures have developed their own BSAPs, which should be very probably completed by the end of this year. The government of Japan compiled a guideline for subnational local government and also support us, the prefectures, when we need their help. Also, Aichi Prefecture is facilitating all municipalities in Aichi to create their BSAPs. Unfortunately, Aichi won't complete it, but our effort work to some degrees, and total 15 or 60 municipalities of 54 are expected to develop their BSAPs. Now, Goals is working on a report on such experiences of members. It will be published before Substar 24 and SBI 3. I hope it would be a good reference for subnational actions. Next slide, please. So thus, we need collaboration with national government for our activities on the ground, and we also need the support of the parties for the dedicated decision ACO 15 and the updated plan of action, the Edinburgh Process requests. So this is a template letter to inform the parties and request their support to our effort in the post-2020 processes. You can find this at the Doc 9 in the Attendify app of Edinburgh Process as a Word document with some guidance in the cover. This is designed for anyone among the Edinburgh Process supporters to use freely. Put your name and organization and arrange the sentences if necessary when you use this. Current sentences mention about the website and YouTube channel of Edinburgh Process, but we will update this template in the future add more specific information of the activities or specific outcomes like webinars or declaration or side event becomes available. Now we're through most of the Edinburgh process and getting close to the launch of the Edinburgh Declaration. It's the time for us to start engaging the parties. We know some of the parties are already involved in the process, but if your national government are not engaged in the process yet, please consider to contact the national focal point and establish certain communication with by using this template. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teru, for your inputs and for highlighting this very important issue on the need to engage national government focal points. And we're going to have more on what that vertical integration looks like when Wadzi delivers her presentation. At this point, I want to move on to a pre-recording that Mr. Robbie Beaver from the Committee of Regions has kindly sent in. As I mentioned, he is unable to be with us in person, but I will play a recording from him.
Participants, I would like to thank ICLEI for having the European Committee of the Regions as part of this very interesting webinar. I'm pleased to share with you the work of the Committee of the Regions with respect to biodiversity. In particular, today I would like to tell you more about the role of regions and cities in the EU Biodiversity Strategy to 2030, and specifically how this strategy relates to the preparatory process towards the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. But please allow me first to spend a few words on the European Committee of the Regions and its role in the European Union. The committee is a voice of regions and cities in the EU. It is a political assembly composed of 329 members from all EU countries who are elected politicians at local and subnational levels. I am, for example, former mayor and today city councillor in Edinburgh, a city in Luxembourg. The European Committee of the Regions represents local and regional authorities, providing advices on new laws that have an impact on regions and cities. You should know that in Europe, 70% of all legislation is implemented by cities and regions, by local and subnational governments. This is why there is an institution dedicated to represent formally cities and regions in the policy-making process. One of the main topics of the Committee of the Regions works is biodiversity. I am currently the rapporteur of an opinion on biodiversity. This means that I am working on defining the role cities and regions in the EU must play with respect to the European Biodiversity Strategy and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Policy Framework. Let's now see more into details the EU strategy and the global framework and what is the contribution of the Committee of the Regions. On the 20th of May 2020, the European Commission has adopted the new EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 and an associated action plan. And the documents themselves say the strategy aims to be a comprehensive, ambitious, long-term plan for protecting nature and reversing the degradation of ecosystems in the next decade. The objective is therefore to put biodiversity and ecosystem services of the European Union on a path to recovery by 2030. A recovery that would benefit people, the climate, and the planet. In the post-COVID context, the biodiversity strategy aims to build our society's resilience to future threats such as climate change impacts, forest fires, food insecurity, or disease outbreaks, including by protecting wildlife and fighting illegal wildlife trade. As you can see in the slide, some of the main elements of the strategy for 2030 are specific commitments and actions for the next decade, including establishing a larger EU-wide network of protected areas on land and at sea, building upon the existing Natura 2000 areas with strict protection for areas of very high biodiversity and climate value. For those of you not familiar with Natura 2000, it is a network of nature protection areas in the territory of the EU, founded in 1992. The network includes both terrestrial and marine protected areas. Second, an EU nature restoration plan, a series of concrete commitments and actions to restore degraded ecosystems across the EU by 2030 and manage them sustainably, addressing the key drivers of biodiversity loss. And third, a set of measures to enable the necessary transformative change. For example, setting in motion a new strengthened governance framework to ensure better implementation and track progress, improving knowledge, financing and investments, and better respecting nature in public and business decision making. But also measures to tackle the global biodiversity challenge, demonstrating that the EU is ready to lead by example towards the successful adaptation and adoption of an ambitious global biodiversity framework under the Convention on Biological Diversity. But concretely, what is at stake for us? Is this strategy? There is a lot of our cities and regions. I feel hopeful that there will be a serious effort by the Commission to engage cities and regions in taking this forward. Making the most of what cities and regions have to offer will mean recognizing the full range of the roles that they can play. European cities and local authorities will be part of the solution by first bringing nature back to cities and reward community action. Indeed, the Commission calls on European cities of at least 20,000 inhabitants to develop ambitious urban greening plans by the end of 2021. Technical guidance will be available by the European Commission on urban greening and assistance to mobilize funding and capacity building for member states and local and regional authorities, including for the development of urban greening plans. Next year, the Commission will set up a European Union urban greening platform under a new Green City Accord with cities and mayors. The Committee of the Regions is already involved in this process with its members. And the Commission will support member states and local and regional authorities through technical guidance and help to mobilize funding and capacity building. It will also reflect these objectives in the EU Climate Pact. And further on, tree planting, especially in cities, will be part of the forest strategy. The EU forest strategy in 2021 will include a roadmap for planting at least 3 billion additional trees in the EU by 2030 in full respect of ecological principles. This will create substantial job opportunities linked to the collecting and cultivating of seeds, planting seeds and seedlings, and ensuring their development. Tree planting is particularly beneficial in cities, while in rural areas it can work well with agroforestry, landscape features, and increased carbon sequestration. Particular focus will also be placed on protecting and restoring the tropical and subtropical marine and terrestrial ecosystems in the EU's outermost regions, given their exceptionally high biodiversity value. And finally, the strategy makes a clear reference to the preparatory process to the UN CBD COP15. The Commission proposed that the European Union ensures that the post-2020 global framework includes, at the minimum, a principle of equality. This translates also into an inclusive approach with participation of all stakeholders, including local authorities, which brings us to the next and final point, the Committee of the Regions in the global context. The Committee of the Regions, in cooperation with other key partners, such as ICLEI, GOLS, Quebec government and Regions 4, but also being a partner of the Edinburgh Process, coordinated by the Scottish Government, is advocated for a COP15 decision dedicated to such national governments, cities or other local authorities for biodiversity. Some of the key points of such a decision could be the following. First, each national plan should delineate, whenever possible, a subnational plan for governments standing below the national level. These subnational biodiversity strategies and action plans should be coherent with nature-based solutions as appropriate. In the resources mobilization, that means the collection and distribution of resources, local and subnational governments should be included with reference to the 12 principles of ecosystem services. And third, in terms of monitoring, evaluation and feedback, local and subnational governments should have a clear role in the collection of data and in the measurement of implementation progress. This has implications on the appropriate identification and definition of indicators for local and subnational governments. Fourth, United Nations parties should allocate a bigger responsibility to local and subnational governments in mainstreaming, capacity building, and communication. And fifth, we should also reflect on how local and subnational governments can contribute convergence, the post-2020 Biodiversity Framework with other agendas, such as the Paris Agreement, the Agenda 2030, the SDGs, the European Green Deal. And finally, let us not forget about the importance of alliances and networks to support local and subnational governments in their work. To summarize, these are some messages of the Committee of the Regions we are advocating for, both at European and global level. We are doing so not only via formal legislative processes, but also participating to events like today's webinar organized by ICLE. We need to join our forces and all together united push our national governments to have our role recognized as important implementers and critical innovators in developing solutions on the ground to halt biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation. Thank you all, and I wish you a good conference.
In Robbie Beaver's absence, I would just like to express our sincerest gratitude and thanks for his inputs. And I think his inputs are leading perfectly to the introduction of our final speaker. And Wadzi, we are so thrilled to have you join us today and to have you on the line. And as I think in Robbie's closing sentences, he was talking about the need for us to collaborate and all come together. And I think you are going to take us through a model of what vertical integration could look like in the context of the South Africa-EU dialogue. So Wadzi, it's great to have you online with us. We welcome you. And without further ado, I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you for allowing us an opportunity to contribute to this very important framework, but also to contribute to these discussions. And I'd like to start by acknowledging the EU partners, as well as the EU Biodiversity Support Program, who are working with us on this initiative. And again, also to acknowledge the support of ICLE that has really provided the technical backstopping to the work that we are doing on this dialogue. I'd just like to start by emphasizing, I guess, the outcomes of the global assessment, and they paint a very stark picture of where we are in terms of biodiversity and the response at the global level to the fact that we are unlikely to meet the Aichi targets for 2020, but more importantly, that transformational change is required. And when we look at the messages emanating from the global assessment, it made a most compelling case for us to do something different. And as we spoke continuously about the concept of transformational change, what does this mean? We felt very strongly as South Africa in our capacity, not only as a sovereign state, but as we are going into this process, we are also the chairs of the African Union and also the current chair of the African Committee of Environment Ministers, AMCEN. And we felt that this idea of transformational change requires and must incorporate us having transformational change even in the way we do things, and hence our interest and participation in processes that are aimed at doing what we do different. And in the process that is being used to develop the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the process that was adopted and informed by COP14, adopted a set of principles. And these principles, we believe, are key to how we work. And they don't only relate to the post-2020 framework itself, but they also relate to the process. And this process needs to be participatory, it needs to be inclusive, it needs to be gender transformative, it needs to be transformative as well as gender responsive. And that's the first set of principles. And we saw that local government, particularly in our context as a mega diverse country, that local government is the point at which decisions for biodiversity are made. And while we have an international system that sets rules, we have a national system that looks at particularly setting national standards, but the decision making is done at subnational levels. In South Africa particularly, we have what we refer to as a concurrent competency. So there's no way that we can have transformative change if we are not having a participatory and inclusive system. And this is what we saw this process doing. And we believe by adopting these principles, we will actually immediately ensure that vertical integration happens in this process. A key concern throughout the implementation of the last strategic plan of the convention have been issues around capacity building, issues around knowledge management, issues around scientific cooperation and transfer, and most importantly, issues around means of implementation. And what we realized is that for us to have a dialogue and a framework that is robust enough and that recognizes the importance of implementation, we need to have this process. We also took it up upon ourselves to build in to the process uptake. And the way to ensure rapid implementation and uptake and all the bold decisions we require is for us to have some kind of cross-sectoral integrated management and engagement at local government level. And so this is the basis that is informing the approach that we are using in this dialogue together with the EU. And our intention is for this dialogue to provide local government partners with an opportunity to engage with the key milestones and events, and not wait for a final product, but to consult. And at every step along the way, we will have an event and engagement that will allow an iterative process of sharing ideas on the key issues that are coming through. We hope that by using this approach, the local government constituency will be able to stay informed and on the issues that are being discussed, but also provide us with an input that is tangible. A key concern in this process around means of implementation has really been, what is it going to cost for us to deliver on a post-2020 framework? And for the previous framework, we were never able to get those figures correct. And we are of the view that by engaging with local authorities that are looking after biodiversity, especially that of global significance, we will be able to do so. So we intend to have a series of events and exchange experiences, identify challenges, and look at ways of raising ambition between 44 district municipalities in South Africa. And initially it was going to be 4 EU municipalities, but now that everything is virtual, we will be able to include even more municipalities in the discussions. And we want to look at covering a number of elements in the dialogues, but the key ones that we are working towards is looking at the overall role that local government will play in post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, but more importantly, also the linkages to the Sustainable Development Goals and how those would be updated. We also are going to take discussions and review the action agenda for nature and people as discussed, and we want to support all of the ongoing work on mainstreaming biodiversity considerations across all spheres of government. We see this as an important opportunity for resource mobilization for the implementation of the strategy at local government level. And by identifying those pilots at local government level, we see that this is going to be really a way of making the global framework much more robust and responsive. The dialogue will have a special session looking at the capacity building needs, as well as those for scientific cooperation and technology transfer. And a key element, as always, will be around awareness raising and advocacy. And then finally, we are wanting to have set commitments made by local government partners that we will present at the COP15, and then bring and take special attention to our local government partners in the process. So that then is what we are hoping that our dialogue will achieve. The target audience for the dialogue is essentially the 44 district municipalities in South Africa, as well as our 8 metropolitan municipalities, which basically covers the entire country. And then we have EU counterparts that will come in and provide us with a dialogue partner to dialogue with, to engage with, and to share experiences. We're also working together with the South African National Biodiversity Institute and the South Africa Local Government Authority, ICLEI, providing us with technical support. We have a role for civil society and to make sure that we've brought in on board and taken along with us the SDG priorities of leaving no one behind. And the idea is then that we bring civil society along with us. We will also talk to key national departments that are providing us with our sister departments, particularly those that look at rural development and land reform, as well as cooperative governance, and the European Union and the European Committee of the Regions. The previous speakers are the strategic partner that we are working with. And all of this work on the dialogue will be underpinned with technical support from ICLEI. So this is the process that we have underway. Thank you.
A huge thank you to you, Wazi, for your time and for sharing this important information with us. It's wonderful to see the process that's underway, and we are certain that it will really culminate in strong support of local and subnational governments at COP15. So thank you for sharing with us and for being with us today. We really appreciate your inputs. And with that was our final speaker for today. And I just want to, before we open up for some questions and discussion, just go through a few things. Remind everyone on the call of Cities with Nature. This is really a way for local and subnational governments to remain connected with each other, with partners, and with the global community of practice. So we encourage all those on the call, if you haven't already joined, to join us on this journey. The network is growing daily. We have now over 163 cities who have joined, and we would welcome many, many more in the lead up to COP15. So I have a very exciting announcement at this point, and that is that we are launching a new local and subnational advocacy for nature website. This will replace our previous website, which was the home of the emerging process, the participatory process, and ways for local and subnational governments to get involved. So you can see on your screen the look and feel of the new website. We will share the URL with you to check it out in the follow-up email from this webinar. But it's really a home for the voice of local and subnational governments to the CBD. And it really serves as an information platform to keep the constituency up to date with relevant news and resources and events and webinars. You can see on the right that it's very user-friendly and dynamic. You can toggle different search categories to look at upcoming moments and key milestones. And you can read some of the outcomes of the previous milestones and outcomes, as well as receive information regarding the emerging position and the call for a dedicated stepped-up decision. This will all take place and be brought together on this new website. So we're really excited to launch this with the support of many partners who you will see on the site. And we encourage you to check this out and to regularly check the website for the important updates as they come about. So at this point, I realize we don't have much time left, but if there are any burning questions, I'm going to ask my colleagues on the line who may have seen some in the chat box. Otherwise, just a reminder, you can either ask your question in the chat or you could raise your hand now and we can unmute you to ask a question to any of our panelists. So the floor is open if anyone would like to share. Okay, it doesn't. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to break the pattern and give people a chance to think about things, but I just wanted to make a comment. It's Sue from Scottish Government, just to say that I think it's really great to see all these presentations have come together and have similar messages that are coming out from the different pieces of work that we're doing. And I'm starting to see that supporting mainstreaming is quite key to driving a lot of different areas, resource mobilisation, capacity building and awareness of the different issues and communications with really throughout the different levels of government. And so it's really nice to see that all these messages are tying up and coming together. I just wondered if any of the panelists or yourselves have any more thoughts on that.
Great, thank you, Sue, for your input and for that comment. I completely agree with you. I wonder if maybe Ingrid would like to respond. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Ingrid.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, you know, if one looks at what's coming out of the informal advisory group recommendations around the long-term approach to mainstreaming of biodiversity, it is clear that and in a sense, it almost captures what both Teru and Wadzi were talking about. Teru was talking about the vertical integration, and Wadzi was talking about the sort of participative approach needed for transformation. And it's very clear that you can't really achieve mainstreaming effectively and efficiently without involving the subnational levels of government, whether these are provinces or prefectures or huge metropolitan sort of conurbations or cities or even secondary cities. And in a sense, you know, it's true at so many levels, because Wadzi referred to the issue of decision making, but there's also the issue of influence around people's behaviors. A lot of what happens at the local level and at the landscape level, often through programs and initiatives and maybe incentives that are introduced by cities, or be they tax incentives or planning incentives or restrictions. You know, these do influence people's choices around how we use nature, what we do in terms of the resource flows of, you know, natural resources, in terms of where our food comes from, where our water comes from, how we keep it clean, etc. And then, of course, I mean, one of the things that we've learned through the COVID-19 experience is that incredibly strong sort of spiritual and mental and well-being need of people to be able to connect to nature. And I do think that if we don't get the mainstreaming and the integration right, in terms of the new global biodiversity framework, to really optimally bring on board the subnational levels of government, we're not going to have that effective implementation of the GBF, and it's not really going to lead to transformative action.
Great, thank you, Ingrid, and I think spot on with your input, so thank you for those insights. Before we close, there is a question for Sue from Philip from the ICLEI European Secretariat, and Philip is asking Sue, has the Edinburgh Process team received any attention or response to the Edinburgh Process from the CBD parties? I wonder if you would respond to that briefly.
We haven't had direct response from the parties, but one of the things that we want to do is, so Tim, I think you showed in your timeline the series of webinars that the CBD are holding for parties in September. And one of the things that we want to do is to present either before or after that series to parties, to let them know what the outcomes of the process are, to really get their greater engagement with subnational governments. So we're looking for that two-sided approach of the subnational constituency approaching the national focal points, but also really awakening the state parties to our outputs and having them actively engage and actively seek out their subnational and local counterparts. So we haven't had any response yet, but we are pushing to get that response.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful, and thanks for clarifying that. There's a final question again to you, Sue, from Jimmy from Uganda, applicant at ICLEI, and the Edinburgh Process is tremendous. Africa still faces barriers to financial flows in the continent, and this does hold local governments, they need to step up on plans, meaning the local government at local, subnational and regional level can't perform well, and their local partners can't pull out their own weight on climate change due to a lack of financial support. So Jimmy's asking, what does Edinburgh use, or what plans do you have in place to ensure that these local partners are able to do their work effectively in terms of resource and financial flows?
So that's, I don't know if I can answer that. We are looking, we're looking to develop a new strategy. I mean, so we're looking to develop our new biodiversity strategy alongside the reflecting what comes out of the post 2020 framework, as I'm sure a lot of everybody will be doing. And so we will be looking at how we can work better with our local governments and really support the work that they're doing already. Because there is a lot going on. We do recognise we need to have better engagement with them. So that's a difficult one for me to answer at the moment. But you know, there is a lot of work that we need to keep supporting.
Yeah, I think this issue is certainly a global one, and this is, you know, part of the reason why we're calling for this resource mobilization to come out very strong.
I think we have to look at, you know, everybody has to really look at what they're doing and use what the resources that they have in a smarter way. You know, we have to support bottom-up approaches as well as down approaches, because, you know, both are as valid as each other.
Tim, I'm just wondering if you have disappeared.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear
sorry,
you.
my sound went briefly, but I think with that we've run out of time, and I just want to express a huge thank you to everyone for attending and taking the time to be with us today. It's always wonderful for us to gather virtually like this and to engage on these very important processes. And I want to give a special thanks to our panelists and speakers. Thank you for your inputs and your insights, and for all your preparations to make today possible. It's wonderful to have you online, and we will be doing a second session of this webinar this afternoon at 3 p.m. South African Central Time, which is Standard Time, sorry, which is GMT +2. So we encourage you to join us then, or to ask your colleagues who were maybe not able to join us in this session that there is another session. And again, we encourage you to register for the upcoming webinars in the series that will run throughout the rest of this year. And with that, I would like to close the webinar and thank you to our team in our World Secretariat for your support on the platform. And we hope to see everyone next time at the August webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.